Thank you so much for having me. Really great to be here. So we've heard a lot about horses and cars and lawyers getting rich. Both I like because a lawyer I am, and horses I have. So let's see what we can do with that, shall we? No, to properly introduce myself, I have really been a venture capitalist for most of my life, and it's really my true passion. And now you will wonder what that has got to do with legal. Well, the answer is partly up there. Everybody is talking about the financial services industry, how bad it is, and about real estate, and what we can do with blockchain, because how inefficient it is. Trust me, all those industries we are mourning, they are glorious compared to my own industry, which is the legal industry. I personally, as a lawyer, until maybe 5 years ago, used to work like my great-grandfather when he was a lawyer. So I had a book and a pen and not much in between. So trust me, if there is one industry that really seriously needs disrupting, that is the legal industry. And I'm trying to do my part around my little firm in Switzerland, which is called PwC Legal, which is the legal arm of PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is not all that small. But with my history as a venture capitalist and as a lawyer, I'm seeing a lot of exciting opportunities these days, mostly people wanting to do ICOs. And since I have been doing many, many investments over those years, they usually not only ask me how to do it, but also what to do. And the typical question goes something like, what will be the Google of blockchain? And I usually answer, well, if I knew, I wouldn't be standing here. And secondly, nobody can know, because I honestly believe that maybe we're seeing the Alta Vista of the blockchain, if even. And in any case, there isn't the blockchain. There will be many, many blockchains for different purposes. And then they ask me, are you investing in Bitcoin? And I usually say no, because I believe Bitcoin is the Kardashian of cryptocurrencies. It's famous for being famous. So I'm not convinced that it really will be the cryptocurrencies, the cryptocurrency. Now, again, there's a lot of value in it. But trying to help my clients, I usually try to take a step back. And since it's such a difficult environment because we have so many unknowns, it's usually good to go back to basics. The most important piece of basics is basically one piece I've learned many, many years ago and which has served me very well, because it's the one fundamental thing that never changes. And I strongly feel and believe that if you understand that, you can do one of two things, and I suppose all of you in the room are trying to do one of two things, and that is either build a new venture based on a new technology or invest in one via an ICO or whatever. And in both instances, I feel you should know and understand this one thing. Now, probably I'm preaching to the choir because we've all heard those concepts at university, but my sort of experience over the past years is that, yes, people do know it, but they don't think about it hard enough. So what I would like to do today is get on a bit of a journey with you and think about some of those things and provide you some of my ideas around them, which hopefully will inform you either for investing or for building your ventures. And in order to do that now, usually there's a drum sort of part here, the most important slide of all of my life, which I haven't invented myself, obviously, because this was done many years ago by a gentleman called Professor Jim Utterback, from MIT. You probably are more familiar with the thing underneath, the bell curve of adoption, which goes back to Moore and Clayton Christensen from Harvard. And typically the colleagues from Harvard are a bit better at articulating things than their guys at MIT, but the guys at MIT usually are the ones with the Nobel Prizes. So you probably should pay more attention to them. Matter of the fact is that both of them are right, and this is sort of a synthesis of both. And what this shows you is one thing that plays out in any industry, has played out in any industry based around any particular technology ever. And that is that any industry really develops in the shape of an S-curve, if you look at it on a composite level. At the beginning, there is a lot of innovation. And at some point, after there have been many hundreds and thousands of players competing for the market, with their solution, a dominant design forms. Once the dominant design is there, innovation takes a backseat. Innovation is not as important anymore, and it's almost impossible to introduce radical innovation in that new industry. Everything gets consolidated upwards, and innovation focuses on incremental improvement. It's all about soft factors, branding, distribution. Big global organizations arise. until at some point, a disruptive innovation appears and the new S-curve starts. Now, the point with disruptive innovations is that they always come from outside of the established industry. What do you expect if you put 3 lawyers into one room? Typically a nicer contract and a fight, right? So this is not where disruption comes from. And one of the reasons why the established industry doesn't get it by and large is because at that time we have big corporations who are typically run by accountants and lawyers at that time who barely understand the technology the company is in the first place based on anymore. And hence they're looking down on this new band of weirdos, as which they're sometimes perceived, coming out of a garage and telling them about they will fall, they will change them. So if we take the horse example, one disruptive innovation would be the migration from horse carriages to cars. And there is not one horse carriage provider and producer who became a car producer. Lohnerkutschen in Vienna tried for a little while, but they didn't get very far. There's not one typewriter producer who became a computer producer. So that is kind of the stuff we learn at school, right? And it sounds really good, especially if you say it really fast. But as said, the problem is everybody in the old industry dies. So there's not much point talking to the old industry. Essentially, you're talking to zombies. And if you ever watched a zombie movie, then you will probably know that talking to a zombie is not a very fruitful exercise. Now, what that means is you have to be very careful with your language and with your thinking because it will inspire your business case. So I spend a lot of time going through white papers, through web pages, getting rid of the word disruption. Because 99.9% of things I'm seeing are not disruptive. I've maybe seen 5 disruptive things in my life. And one of them clearly is the internet. The other one is the blockchain. But the application thereof is not necessarily disruptive. By and large, it's evolutionary. And when it's evolutionary, it basically moves things up an established S-curve. It makes things better, more efficient, improves them. And there's a fundamental difference with that. Because if you're disrupting, don't bother to talk with the industry, just build your own, right? You will just eat them at some point. And actually, those lines are crossing over at some point when you overtake them. Whereas when you make something better, when you improve something, when you bring efficiency into it or add value, cut out a non-value adding part of a non-value chain, then you have to come up with a different business plan. And you probably have to accept that at some point, once you've done the innovative part, you probably will have to partner with somebody, sell to somebody, or license to somebody which is just selling stretched over time. Because once the key performance parameters switch, then factors that are typically covered better by other players will win the market. If you have, a blockchain-based, say, application which looks after the accounting of every house in the market, yes, you can go to every country in the world and try to sign up every house in the world, but probably if there's somebody out there who already has that data and those connections, it's probably easier for them to do that. So example I usually bring is if you have a dental implant technology, of which there are many in my homeland in Switzerland, then you're probably not well advised to try to start up your own company, try to distribute it over the planet, because you will have to see millions of dentists about it, right? It's probably easier to just sell it to one of the big companies who already own the relationship with the dentists. Now, this is very important because I see so many with great ideas who get this wrong. Everybody wants to be disruptive and everybody wants to be the Uber of something, And that's cool, sounds really good in the bar at night. I grant you it's definitely better than saying I'm a regulatory lawyer. But it's not true in all instances, and it doesn't help you. So you need to be really cunning about it. And again, don't try to say revolution is better than evolution. In fact, in most instances, evolution is better, right? Because you have people in your corner rather than have to fight everybody for everything. So we agree on this? Good. Usually I get objections and like, no, Uber is disruptive. Nah, not really. It's still a taxi, right? Yes, it was a bit disruptive for the taxi industry, but it's so much more than a taxi, right? The combined Uber market in San Francisco was around 150 million a year. The Uber market today is more than $400 million. So it unlocked all of that value. It's more, yes, it was cannibalizing the taxi market, but it's still a taxi at the end of the day. It's getting you from A to B, just with a lot more convenience and additional services packed on top. It's not what cars did to horses. Cars wiped out more horses than all wars together. That was pretty disruptive for anybody in that industry, to pick up on the example from before. Now, financial services. We are quite often touching upon financial services, be it on the funding of real estate or whatever, somewhere, and there a different game plays out, but the same dynamics apply. So if you're in the financial services space, technology is not so important. I'm not trying to say it's not important, but it's not so important. You typically don't go to your bank because of the glorious e-banking system it has, right? And you usually don't go to them because of the wonderful app they have. That's a nice thing that will keep you with them, but that's not what originally attracts you to them. It's mostly the brand, the trust, the balance sheet, whatever it may be. Could be the logo, but it's typically not the technology. So what wins in the market is regulation. If you don't comply with the regulatory standard in the financial services industry, you're basically building horse carriages. You don't believe me? Obviously, he doesn't. Well, I come from Switzerland, and we've learned that the really hard way, right? Switzerland is the third most important country in the world for the distribution of fund products. Switzerland, within the span of a few years, has been wiped off the face of the planet as a fund production hub. Why is that? There is no material difference between a Swiss Effektenfonds securities fund and, say, a Luxembourg securities fund. Well, the difference is a Swiss securities fund is not a UCITS fund, right? And since it's not a UCITS fund, it doesn't comply with the dominant design of that market. You can't export this thing. And what has happened is Switzerland has been erased to zero relevance in the market. And not only that, we've even lost our domestic market, where 86% of products distributed today are non-Swiss products. So non-compliance with regulatory standards is basically building horse carriages in the technology space. Now the challenge is, typically when you're playing in the real estate market, you have to deal with both elements. So you have two unknowns. We don't yet know what the dominant technical design will be, which blockchain for which application, which solutions will win, and we do not have a clear picture of the regulations which will apply yet, as has been discussed. And that makes it incredibly interesting for me, but you have to be a bit of a geek, like myself, to enjoy that, and it makes it challenging for you. On the other hand, this uncertainty, this risk, is just the inversion of the value you can create and unlock. So this is your true challenge. You need to understand those two dimensions, you need to follow them, and whatever you're proposing, you need to get the mix right. So we can all go home now. The slides that come up now are comparatively irrelevant, because I really, really strongly feel if you get this one right, if you understand that, if you play it well, this is the key to success. Now, as to the challenges, one is a technical one. Can we blockchain this, please? Here is another wonderful slide I like to share with you. It's done by my colleague Mike Quindasi from our strategy arm in the US, and this is one that usually leads to heated debate. Now, obviously not if you do this 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but if this was 7 o'clock in the evening in the bar, we would all be fighting over this one. And here the question is, when will decisive technologies reach their tipping point? When will we reach mass adoption? And now dead center in here, you have blockchain. And our view as PwC, and you can throw stones at me for this one, and we can debate whether it's 3, 4, 5 years, but I tell you it's not next year, and it's not the year thereafter. So I believe it's maybe 3 to 5 years until we reach the tipping point where the technology, where blockchain will be at a stage of early mass adoption. And this is really important, because whenever you're bringing something to market, which is going to a mass market, a retail market, you need to have this timeline in mind. And everybody is always comparing blockchain and everything that goes with it sort of to the internet. Everybody comes up with 1999. Now, I do remember 1999. It's not exactly the same, and first of all, 1999, or the burst of the dot-com bubble, is not exactly what it was cracked up to be. It's not that everything was wrong and everything went belly up. No, what has happened is obviously there was a lot of stupid ideas and a lot of overvaluation going around, but also what has happened is, you remember the other curve, the bell curve of adoption, you initially have us, right? That's the geeks, sorry to say, right? We are the early adopters, the freaks and the geeks, or the lucky fools, if you like, right? But we are not the mass market. If you go out there into the beautiful square and you ask anybody about how does blockchain work and what is cryptocurrency, half of them will go like blah, and they will tell you something like my father did in 1998 when I wanted to have access to the internet, or BTX as we called it at the time, for my research for my PhD. He said no. The internet, that is all just and only about pornography. I was yes, there is that, but I was not able to convince him. I still had to commute to university where we had one computer which was linked to the system to do that. You get the same kind of reaction when you talk blockchain. They all will tell you, oh, this is about drug dealers and cryptocurrencies, and no, you're mixing a couple of things, but that's the kind of sort of mindset we have in many cases. So what this tells me is we are not at a point of mass adoption yet, and we need to be aware of that. It was brought up by the panel beforehand. We have a timeline we need to work against. So if you're playing in the institutional area, if you're catering with your solution to the institutional field, you might get a chance. If you have something that's going to go retail, you probably have to factor that in. When it comes to the fundraising and when it comes to the convincing, you will have to do. Third, input, both for investors and for drivers of change. Now let's see. No, blockchain is still dead. So let's try over here. Let's do it old school. Another slide I would like to share with you. Don't bother, don't try to read it. I guess you get the slides afterwards. It's not just a blockchain. There's a lot of other tech solutions that go on around it. And we had a very interesting talk during the break about big data and all of those things which you can use, in particular in the real estate context. So all of this somehow plays into this change which we're experiencing right now, and we sort of zoomed out what is typically summarized under blockchain and cryptocurrencies and all of that good stuff. But there's so much more. Again, it's very important that you understand what all of those opportunities really mean in terms of potential applications and what they could mean for your opportunity which you're trying to bring to market, and how they play together and how they will alter the ecosystem you're working against. Again, something to read if you can't fall asleep tonight, but maybe again, hopefully something that is helpful for you. Another interesting slide, which you've probably seen. Now, it looks like everybody gets sort of depressed when I say it's going to be 3, 5, 7 years until mass adoption. Now, just to remind you, that is the time it took for adoption of technology, and we're using the US here as an example to illustrate. So for the telephone, it took 75 years, plus or minus, to reach every household in the US. Even the internet, which we are talking about, took 7 to 8 years, depending on what metrics you deploy. So what it shows is that timelines are getting shorter, but it still takes a bit of time. On the other hand, we have the internet to help us. Today, you can have global reach. So we have things like Angry Birds. It took 35 days to reach 50 million users. So you can do that if you have a solution that really speaks to the masses and that brings the dominant designs together in one compelling solution, right? You couldn't have done this before. I mean, today, if you speak in Amsterdam, basically, if somebody has a good Twitter following or whatever, people in Japan and in Brazil will know about it in an instant, right? This is the new opportunity. But obviously, you will also have transparency. So if your proposition doesn't fly, they will also know. So this is sort of the challenge, but also the opportunity you're up against. And again, you should factor that into your planning, be it when it comes to investing or when it comes to deploying new ideas. Here's what we call the essential 8 of game-changing technologies. And I usually say blockchain is dead center of it. 2 days ago or something like that, somebody in a presentation said, no, it's to the left, it's not dead center. Yes, you're right, so it's somewhere up there. So it's all across this. Now, when you think about the real estate space, all of that will play a role. Again, we've been discussing over during the break. I've seen a very interesting startup, and they're using drones for real estate. So essentially what they're doing is they're flying the drones through the real estate. They take movies of everything, they put it in a blockchain, and 7 years later, when that real estate is handed back to the landlord, the drone takes the same path and films the entire thing, compares it, and then you don't have this discussion around, was this wall broken before or not? What about this door? They're still working on little details. It's very difficult for drones to flush toilets and to check with the light switches and stuff like this, but just to give you an idea. Once this works, they're actually linking this with the legal database which is checking on what's the probability of the outcome if there's a legal debate or a quarrel around effect or not. So just to pick one, because everybody was going, well, drones, isn't that overrated? Again, I think drones will wipe out great many number of people who are currently doing manually, going through real estate, doing the handover, filling out charts and so forth. So again, you need to combine all of that and probably don't miss out on too many depending on the proposition you're bringing to market. Blockchain, again, I see a lot of things that are being brought to market where I just feel that somebody somehow artificially kicked the blockchain into this idea, right? I think there was a debate in the morning as well. Do you really, really need blockchain for any particular solution? So don't try to over-engineer it. I believe that for many, many things today, you can still, and for some time, will be able to do it better with databases or whatever rather than blockchain. But there are instances where it does make sense. And here is sort of 3 criteria, if you want, if it's about really eternalizing, storing data. Now, people are talking about the running of registers and so forth. Now, why are people not so hot about it, say, in the Netherlands or in Switzerland? Well, because it works, kind of. Obviously, everybody is not so happy with the speed, and sometimes you would like to, strangle some of the people in charge of that. But by and large, it works. And why does it work? Because people trust in it, right? But we're seeing other locations. We've recently been talking with an emerging country which has gone through various decades of dictatorship and where people are not trusting in the system. And there is a huge appetite, hunger, and a need to put that data into the blockchain. So again, don't try to put your first world thinking hat on when you think about change in this space, and probably don't start with change. We have amazing work that is done in Zurich right now around the Trust Square, where it's about identity. Now, we all have our identity, okay? Honestly, a couple of 2 weeks or so ago, I was in Moscow and I lost my cell phone. It's not funny, and my credit card. Or I had it lost, shall we say. And, I had it to fret around, but it took me, 2 hours, 3 hours, and I had it all back. Whereas if you're living somewhere in a tumultuous country and you have to flee, you want to be able to access your identity, your records. You want to prove the ownership of your real estate from afar if need be. So again, you probably need to look beyond, and you need to come up with cases that might emerge elsewhere. Exchange of digital assets, same thing. Exchange, by and large works. So if I'm buying a house, I just got an SMS from one of my team members, and he's so proud because he just bought his first flat. And he's 31 years, and he wants to do get together with champagne and so forth. There is no need for speed in this one. He's been going there 12 times, looking at it. He actually wants to sit as the notary with his wife and sign for this. Again, we must be careful not to buy our own hype, right? But on the other hand, if you're changing hands on a big block in, New York, Manhattan, hundreds, thousands of tenants and documents and ownership, there it may make sense. But again, when do we have to do that? The important thing, I believe, is when it comes to the funding side, the crowdfunding and all of that, because essentially we are opening up this way, potentially, an asset class which previously was very restricted to institutional investors, to an informed client base which doesn't have the assets. So that's largely us in this room, We know a thing or two about venture capital, about real estate, but the really interesting performance-creating opportunities, they were not for us, because you had to be a qualified institutional investor to access them. You couldn't just invest in a venture fund or in a really, really interesting real estate fund, depending on where you are and how it's structured. So yes, there is this chance. But again, there is also the risk profile, right? Just because you tokenize it and just because you spread it, the risk is the same. So you can ICO a venture until the cows go home, but until you have a market, until you have clients, until you have a product, and until you're in the market, it's illiquid and the valuation is negative. The hockey stick doesn't go away. So again, people have to understand that just because you change the funding mechanism, this doesn't change the underlying principles of the investment opportunity, which is something that is currently going, I think, a bit in the wrong direction. Smart contracts. Obviously, this is the thing that is supposed to wipe out people like myself, mostly lawyers. And obviously, we are now entering the territory of the discussion, is code law or not? But again, I believe the opportunity with smart contracts is efficiency and trust that can be created and the speed of execution. An example I'm usually bringing from the fund space. Today, if you want to subscribe to fund shares, since many, many layers of stakeholders are involved in this process, it takes days until you actually see this thing pop up in your portfolio. Whereas on a blockchain world, this can be done, obviously, in seconds. Again, since we're running out of time, here is some of the benefits primarily for the financial services sector, because this is the one where it plays out first and very transparently, I would say. But many of the arguments, again, here can be used vice versa for the real estate space. We could spend now the entire afternoon talking about all of them, and I have wonderful, exciting examples to all of them, trust me, but I guess we reserve that for the pause. Since you will receive the slides, maybe when you look at opportunities, consider investment, or when you indeed want to bring your opportunity to market, think if some of those things play in there, if some of the arguments can be used and do indeed underpin your opportunity as well. I tried to do the one thing you shouldn't do here, and I always am preaching evangelistically about it, and that is don't look at the new in the context of the old, because whatever replaces the old typically appears like the old. So the first, to pick up on the old example again, horse carriages, they looked very much like cars. So many horse carriages producers were not so worried about it because they said they're very ugly horse carriages, right? But within a very short time frame, they proved them wrong. So again, what I'm trying to do here is just illustrate one point, and that is many, many applications and use cases we know in the Web 2.0 context, they are being brought to the audience now in the Web 3.0 context. And the only thing, please don't pin me to the names, they will change, and rapidly so as this industry evolves. But the one thing that is interesting to see is that hardly any of the old players, and when we say old, we mean houses that are typically younger than 20 years, right? Some of them younger than 10 years, are not playing in this field. So many of the features we have gotten used to in the age of digitization, they are now being catered to by new solution providers. So there is a revolution unfolding, and we have to watch it. Again, I know this is a slide I will regret for years to come, because many of those names will just go away. I'm not trying to promote any of those names. I'm not trying to say you should embrace them. All I'm trying to do here is show that there's new kids on the block, and there are different ones, so that an entire industry across the plane, also in the internet space, is in for a waking up. Now here's an example which is, I feel a bit ashamed of it, to be honest, in this context, but which I'm using for my lawyers, by and large, to explain to them what smart contracts do. Now, I understand that you all know what smart contracts do, but essentially, this is the future, and I'm just using the example of a car because it's easier, but there are parallels, because still, you have a car register involved somewhere. You can't just take it and drive it. Even if you exchange the money, you still need to facilitate that change with the insurance company and with some kind of competent authority which looks after it. So there's parallels, and this is first cases where it has been tried, where it is being tried in sort of small environments. Even for small applications, there's a company in Switzerland which is today tackling the challenge that if you buy your car, you usually don't do it like I do it. You go into the store and you buy it. No, you're hopefully as smart as my wife, who goes on the web and actually finds a cheaper opportunity to buy the same car, and then goes and buys it. And then afterwards, you create a challenge, because if something is wrong with the car and you need to replace a filter, then, well, basically you need to go to a garage and have it replaced. But the question is it the right garage? Is it the right filter, so that the warranty gets extended? And ultimately that the insurance company pays for it in the background. Now again, this is rather cumbersome today. It's quite elaborate a process which costs quite a bit of money. Just think blockchain, right? The same thing you can do in the real estate context. How many times have you had to fret with an insurance company because a washing machine broke down in a tenant's place or whatever? All of those things. Don't always just think about the building as a whole or all the things that can be done. The entire facility management that goes with it, where so many stakeholders are involved. All of those things can be done just like here with the change of car, which is a bit more elaborate on the next page, and where essentially we are saying, look, it's been raised on the panel before, public tender. I want to sell my car, which is sitting in Zurich. On level 10, by the way, if you want to steal it, in parking house number 1, and I'm tired of it, it's sitting there, so I put it out on the market, and I say, look, I would like to have X, Y, Z Swiss francs or euros for it. You agree that you buy it, it's a good price. You send me the money, I get the money, you go there, car automatically unlocks once you provide your blockchain-based credentials. You get in the car and you drive off, and by the time you drive off, also the insurance has changed and the car register has changed. So I believe, yes, this will happen. I believe this will also happen in the real estate market. I just don't believe it will happen first in Switzerland or in the Netherlands, because we have systems that work here and there is not enough pain to change it. So obviously the downside hedge, if you like, is if somebody steals my car because I told you that it's on level 10 because it's so well insured and I want a new one, then this wouldn't work because obviously you wouldn't be able to authorize yourself, because your key would not correspond with what basically the ecosystem would verify as the ownership for my car. And obviously the same could be done with a car, but houses don't get stolen a lot unless obviously there is sort of a political change and people have to flee the country. Here is a summary of just trying to illustrate what things can be achieved by bringing the blockchain into the mix, and again to inform your proposition if you're so interested. So where again you see with traditional contracts, it takes days, first of all, to draft them because the lawyers take time, they need to think about it or can't find the template. And then you need the parties to get onto one table. Now again, a lot of that has already been digitized. So e-signing and all of that is kind of working, at least within a country and so forth. But again, once we have a really functioning smart contracts-based ecosystem, all of that can be done within seconds rather than days. Manual remittance, all of that will be automated. Obviously, that means something for the people in the value chain. Escrow doesn't become necessary anymore. The cost of it, I mean, we reduced the cost for legal documents by having automated legal documents. That was also discussed before. There's already in the market, by the way, which we launched a year or so ago. By a third, at least. We could even reduce it further down once the initial cost for creating them is done. Again, you know, a lot of that will go away. Physical presence, unless you want to have that glass of champagne in your hand and, you know, when you buy that house or sell it, depending on who has the better financial understanding of that, there is no need for that anymore. Now, especially in this interconnected world where we all travel somewhere, that is obviously something that may be of interest. Last line is usually to threaten my team. I strongly believe that many, many lawyers will be necessary or not. No, I don't think so, because a lot of the work that is being done is just repetitive and can be automated, and everything that can be automated will be automated. So I actually just put up a coding course for my lawyers just to give them a future. And that's probably not bad news for all of you. Again, sectors that may be affected, and that you will probably be screaming now, real estate is not up there. Well, real estate to me is a cross-sector application. All of those things, and I believe we've talked about them during the course of this conference, they are playing into that somehow, some way, depending on where in the value chain of real estate you are. So you could put real estate up there, but I think it's an innocent bystander, and it sort of gets dragged into this and can benefit from all of this, which will be, well, gambling probably not, which will be exposed to that. Final 3 slides I will not go through in detail. Again, I just would like to share one piece of information which I believe is important for you. You may remember the second slide, how important regulation is, because it defines the standard, the dominant design for anything that's in the financial services space. Now, being here, close to the heart of the EU, and a bit closer to it than I would usually feel coming from Switzerland, we feel that the EU, as one of the key standard setters, is sort of sleeping on that. No, they are not. In fact, the EU has taken sort of the lead on that, I would say. So here is sort of the first initiatives that have been launched, and I hardly dare mention them, because if something has 2015 on it in the context of blockchain or cryptocurrency, it's stone old. But just to show that they've been starting to think about it already a couple of years ago. And most importantly, they have just launched their new, or they've just published on the 8th of March, their new FinTech Action Plan. And I've really spent some time reading it. It's not as big as MiFID II, but it's a legal text or legal type text, so it's not exciting reading, but it just shows that they, for the first time in my book, sort of switched to a positive view of certain things. And in particular, blockchain is dead center in their thinking. So they are proposing, and they are launching on a very ambitious timeline, a blockchain observatory, and they're highlighting that blockchain will be key. 2 weeks ago, or a week ago, or 10 days ago, something like that, also the resolution was taken on blockchain, and it's called Building Trust by Disintermediation. So again, in the parliament, there is a movement which is starting to embrace the theme. So again, I believe, we are always very quick to criticize politicians, and in particular the EU. Nobody likes a big administrative apparatus, but I think we have to give them credit. They're waking up to that. I think the initial fear or criticism of it is sort of moving into a more positive, embracing sphere, and they're coming up with concrete actions. So compared to other regions in the world, which are way more restrictive in their thinking around this, I believe that the EU is committed to taking that one up and to lead. They have understood that technology is important to change the DNA of all our mechanisms, but also for Europe, which otherwise is losing out against other regions because we are not so competitive given the smallness of various countries. So again, I guess it's something we should get behind. There are some politicians driving that. I'm not trying to advocate for them, but they come sort of from all parties, coming together, driving that agenda. And I believe we as an industry and representatives there should support them with technical input and content. Because still, as we discussed at the very beginning, people out there on the street, they don't really fully understand, A, what it actually is, and B, what it could mean. So it's not the time for sort of political discussions around parties or whatever. It's really the time, I believe, about technical discussions and talking about the possibilities and what should be done around this. But again, even if you don't want to engage in this, at least watch the space, because as I hope I have been able to bring across, regulation is important and will decide about the success of all of this. Two more things I would like to point out before I finally get out of here, because I have a big Nordic-looking gentleman, for once without an X, looking at me grinningly, and so I'm getting scared. We are launching a vlog. I called it a vlog for a long time until my younger, smarter team members educated me. And it's going to be called Appetite for Disruption. We've been working on it many months now, and it will launch probably in September. And all of those things I've been touching upon, like S-curves, adoption, dynamics, regulation, and all of that will be presented in those videos in a rather cool form. And we also have done a lot of interviews with thought leaders and people who are really practicing it to give you a chance to get all of this information if you find it mildly interesting. But trust me, it's going to be quite different. It's going to be quite entertaining, and I hope also informative for whatever you're trying to build. And final thing I would like to share with you is our regulatory radar. If you believe me that regulation is key in the strategic dimension for building anything in the blockchain context, here you will find the information for all the things you have to watch. Now, you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to contract a lawyer on an ongoing basis. You can do that yourself. All you need to do is read. And here we're providing you basically in an animated way all the regulations as they're coming at you in a summarized form, so you can read up on the latest developments. And that if then there is a question, you can contact us. But I'm quite sure that with that information in here, you will already be able to inform yourself to a degree where you can validate your business model and come up with questions as they might be relevant. If you still think that that information is not enough and you can't get enough of me, or you just need an answer, please do feel free to reach out. I hope the one thing that came across is that I am, and clearly my entire team, are really passionate about this theme and the things unfolding around us. And usually my battle cry at the end is the one that my generation has largely failed. We had this big promise of the internet, and I remember just after I had convinced my father that it's not all about porn, and once I finally got it, I fell into this dream that it will make us all better people and turn this into a better place, because we all have access to information, and we all will have equal access to all information all around the world, which would have huge positive social impact. Well, what has happened? We have fewer people than ever controlling all of the information, right? I mean, the Tsar in Russia couldn't have dreamed about the power Mr. Zuckerberg has, right? So anyway, I think we have a bit screwed up on this one. So we have a second chance now. And it's very rare that in one generation you get the chance twice to see such a disruptive movement. And I strongly believe that the blockchain will have the same changing effect as the internet had. We still can't imagine how it will go into every aspect of our life, into everything we do, as has the internet. And I believe this is a chance, but this is more for the younger people here. So this is your call to arms. We will try to support it, and I definitely do with my team, who are all a lot younger. And as such, we are passionate about the theme, and we'll be happy to help you on your journey. But with that, I want to send you on your journey and not take much of your time. And just my final battle cry, it's the time to do really amazing things. So use the chance and don't get scared by regulation. Don't get scared by innovation dynamics. Just understand them and use them to your benefit. Thank you for your attention.